CHAPTER 13 of God's Country and the Woman. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. God's Country and the Woman by James Oliver Curwood. Chapter 13. Alone, and with the deadening depression that had come with Jean's last words, Philip returned to his room. He had made no effort to follow the half breed who had shamed him to the quick beside the grave of his wife. He felt no pleasure, no sense of exultation that his suspicions of Croisset's feelings toward Josephine had been dispelled. Since the hour MacTavish had died up in the madness of the Arctic night, deep and hopeless gloom had not laid its hand more heavily upon him. He bolted his door, drew the curtain to the window, and added a bit of wood to the few embers that still remained alive in the grate. Then he sat down, with his face to the fire, the dry birch bursting into flame, and for half an hour he sat staring into it with almost unseeing eyes. He knew that Jean would keep his word, that even now he was possibly on the fresh trail that led through the forest. For him there was something about the half breed now that was almost omniscient. In him Philip had seen incarnated the things which made him feel like a dwarf in manhood. In those few moments close to the graves Jean had risen above the world, and Philip believed in him. Yet with his belief his optimism did not quite die. In the same breath Jean had told him that he could never possess Josephine, and that Josephine loved him. This, in itself, Jean's assurance of her love, was sufficient to arouse a spirit like his with a new hope. At last he went to bed, and in spite of his mental and physical excitement of the night he fell asleep. John Adare did not fail in his promise to rouse Philip early in the day. When Philip jumped out of bed in response to Adare's heavy knock at the door, he judged that it was not later than 7 o'clock, and the room was still dark. Adare's voice came booming through the thick panels in reply to Philip's assurance that he was getting up. "This is the third time," he cried. "I have cracked the door trying to rouse you, and we've got a caribou porterhouse 2 inches thick waiting for us." The giant was walking back and forth in the big living room when Philip joined him a few minutes later. He wore an Indian made jacket and was smoking a big pipe. That he had been up for some time was evident from the logs fully ablaze in the fireplace. He rubbed his hands briskly as Philip entered. Every atom of him disseminated good cheer. "You don't know how good it is to get back home," he exclaimed, as they shook hands. "I feel like a boy, actually like a boy, Philip. Didn't sleep 2 winks after I went to bed, and Miriam scolded me for keeping her awake. Bless my soul, I wouldn't live in Montreal if they'd make me a present of the whole Hudson's Bay Company." "Nor I," Philip said. "I love the North." "How long?" "4 years without a break." "One can live a long time in the North in 4 years," mused the master of Adare House. "But Josephine said she met you in Montreal." "True," laughed Philip, catching himself. "That was a break, and I thank God for it. Outside of that I spent all the 4 years north of the Height of Land. For 18 months I have lived along the edges of the Arctic, trying to make an impossible census of the Eskimo for the government." "I knew something of the sort when I first looked at you," said Adare. "I can tell an Arctic man just as I can pick a Herschel dog or an Athabasca country malemute from a pack of 50. We have much to talk about, my boy. We will be great friends. Just now we are going to that caribou steak." Out into the hall, through another door, and down a short corridor he led Philip. Here a third door was open, and Adare stood aside while Philip entered. "This is my private sanctuary," he said proudly. "What do you think of it?" Philip looked about him. He was in a room almost as large as the one from which they had come. In a huge fireplace a pile of logs were blazing. One end of the room was given up almost entirely to shelves and weighted down with books. Philip was amazed at their number. The other end was still partially hidden in glooms, but he could make out that it was fitted up as a laboratory, and on shelves he caught the white gleam of scores of wild beasts' skulls. Comfortably near to the fire was a large table, scattered with books, papers, and piles of manuscript, and behind this was a small iron safe. Here, Philip thought, was the adytum of no ordinary man. It was the study of a scholar and a scientist. He marked the absence of mounted heads from the walls, but in spite of that, the very atmosphere of the room breathed of the forest and the beast. Here and there he saw the articulated skeletons of wild animals. From among the books themselves, the jaws and ivory fangs of skulls gleamed out at him. Before he had finished his wondering survey of the strange room, John Adare stepped to the table and picked up a skull. "This is my latest specimen," he said, his voice eager with enthusiasm. "It is perfect. Jean secured it for me while I was away. It is the skull of a beaver, and shows in three distinct and remarkable gradations how nature replaces the soft enamel as it is worn from the beaver's teeth. You see, I am a hobbyist. For 20 years I have been studying wild animals. And there—" He replaced the skull on the table to point to an isolated shelf filled with books and magazines. "There is my most remarkable collection," he added, a gleam of humour in his eyes. "They are the books and magazine stories of nature fakirs, the works of naturalists who had never heard the howl of a wolf or the cry of a loon, the wild dreams of fictionists, the rot of writers who spend 2 weeks or a month each year on some blazed trail and return to the cities to call themselves students of nature. When I feel in bad humour I read some of that stuff and laugh." He leaned over to press a button under the table. "One of my little electrical arrangements," he explained. "That will bring our breakfast. To use a popular expression of the uninformed, I'm as hungry as a bear. As a matter of fact, you know, a bear is the lightest eater of all brute creation for his size, strength, and fat supply. That row of naturalists over there have made him out a pig. The beast's a genius, for it takes a genius to grow fat on poplar buds." Then he laughed good humouredly. "I suppose you are tired of this already. Josephine has probably been filling you with a lot of my foolishness. She says I must be silly, or I would have my stuff published in books. But I am waiting till I have come down to the last facts. I am experimenting now with the black and the silver fox, and there are many other experiments to come, many of them. But you are tired of this." Tired? Philip had listened to him without speaking. In this room John Adare had changed. In him he saw now the living, breathing soul of the wild. His own face was flushed with a new enthusiasm as he replied: "Such things could never tire me. I only ask that I may be your companion in your researches, and learn something of the wonders which you must already have discovered. You have studied wild animals for 20 years?" "24, day and night. It has been my hobby." "And you have written about them?" "A score of volumes, if they were in print." Philip drew a breath. "The world would give a great deal for what you know," he said. "It would give a great deal for those books, more than I dare to estimate. Undoubtedly it would be a vast sum in dollars." Adare laughed softly in his beard. "And what would I do with dollars?" he asked. "I have sufficient with which to live this life here. What more could money bring me? I am the happiest man in the world." For a moment a cloud overshadowed his face. "And of late I have yet a worry," he added thoughtfully. "It is because of Miriam, my wife. She is not well. I had hoped that the doctors in Montreal would help her. But they have failed. They say she possesses no malady, no sickness that they can discover. And yet she is not the old Miriam. God knows I hope the tonic of the snows will bring her back to health this winter." "It will," declared Philip. "The signs point to a glorious winter, crisp and dry, the sledge and dog kind, when you can hear the crack of a whip half a mile away." "You will hear that frequently enough if you follow Josephine," chuckled Adare. "Not a trail in these forests for 100 miles she does not know. She trains all of the dogs, and they are wonderful." It was on the point of Philip's tongue to ask the reason for the silence of the fierce pack he had seen the night before, when he caught himself. At the same moment the Indian woman appeared through the door with a laden tray. Adare helped her arrange their breakfast on a small table near the fire. "I thought we would be more congenial here than alone in the dining room, Philip," he explained. "Unless I am mistaken, the ladies wouldn't be up until dinner time. Did you ever have a steak done to a finer turn than this? Marie, you are a treasure." He motioned Philip to a seat and began serving. Nothing in this world is better than a caribou.